All right, here we are, another episode, Coffee with the Founder. Here with my coffee cup and my coffee, and of course we have another outstanding guest, Jenna Chandler-Ward, who's a good friend, a good colleague, and a good sister. Jenna, we're glad you're here. Today, what we're doing with the Coffee Talks are really introducing people to the good folks in the WPC network. So today we're glad you're here to kind of talk about who you are and what you do, and really let folks know about all the great things you're doing, not only when you're at the conference, but also when you leave the conference. So let's start with, who are you? Who are you? What do you do?
Thank you. I am Jenna Chandler-Ward. I am a mom, I'm an educator, and I'm a consultant. I've been an educator in lots of different forms for nonprofits, schools, universities for, 20 years or something. And from that work, started to become more and more interested in identity and how it impacts teaching and learning, and then more specifically about race and how whiteness goes unnamed and yet is often or almost always the baseline from which everything is judged, and decided I really wanted to deep dive into that, since education is supposed to be the great equalizer of our nation, and yet was seeing it was not doing that at all. In fact, I don't think it was designed to do that ever. And so wanted to shine a very specific light on that. And over 84% of teachers are white. And we're not talking about whiteness in education most times. And so started a bunch of different projects, but most recently the Teaching While White, which is a podcast and a blog. And we do a lot of consulting across the country with that organization, working primarily with white teachers, trying to figure out what's going on, what's best practices, what works, what doesn't, and have had the great fortune of going to schools and universities across the country. So now I feel like I have a landscape of the country, as opposed to, I used to be very focused in New England and another time in California. So that's what I've been doing until this all hit.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask you about, when this all hit, COVID-19. I'm going to also ask you a little bit more about Teaching While White and how that came about in more detail. But before that, you mentioned the state of education, which I often get frustrated, because most times when people talk about that, they talk about it from the vantage point of kids of color and how they're doing, which is a lot of times not very good news, depending on what state you're in and who you're talking to. But not often do we start with the white teacher, the white educator, the white curriculum, the white school. But let's just say white teacher, based on your work. White educator, what's the state of the white educator in reference to really the profession and the clients, the students they're serving, and the challenges ahead?
That's a big question. Well, I need to start by saying I love teachers, and nobody goes into teaching thinking I want to go out and hurt some kids today. And yet that's what's happening every day. It's a symptom of a larger structure, right? We grow up in racial isolation as white folks oftentimes, and have very little authentic cross-racial interactions, relationships, and therefore have only stereotypes and what we've been taught to fall back on most times. And as we know, that is toxic and problematic at best, and really extremely harmful at worst. And so most teachers that I work with don't even know that they're white, or if they know that, they sort of know that that means they have a certain pigment in their skin, but they have no idea of how that might impact teaching, what they teach, how they teach, what they focus on, what they think is good work or bad work, what's a good student look like, what's a bad student look like, and have never sort of interrogated those things at all. And so it's terrifying, I think, for a lot of teachers to find out and figure it out. And then there's that sense of responsibility. And a lot of teachers say, you know what, I'm out. I can't it's too much responsibility and I don't know that I can handle it. And the others say, well, this is what I got, this is what I'm going to know. And so therefore, if I'm going to screw up, I just won't talk about race at all. And then there's a very small fraction of white teachers who say, okay, let's go, let's figure this out. I want to do better. I want to know more. So trying to get more groundswell of like, it's not optional. This is not like, if you feel like it, just in the same way that we say to our teachers, using computers isn't optional. Racial literacy should not be optional, and there has to be accountability and there has to be support. There have to be ways for teachers to get support and learn and do better, and they have to be held accountable, and there has to be a culture shift. And so trying to work with institutions at the broader level, trying to figure out how to incorporate more measures of accountability and expectation. And then at the individual level, working with individual teachers, coaching, doing white anti-racist affinity groups, curriculum reviews, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, I want to talk to you more, like I said, about teaching while white and how I got started and the work you and Elizabeth are doing around that. But before I get a little bit deeper into that, I was going to ask you, what's been the reception to the podcast, the work y'all have been doing? And also, I know you're doing the Institute as well. So overall, I mean, what's been your sense of the reception to essentially moving the needle around white teacher preparation, white educator preparation for a global citizenry?
Well, as you might guess, it's a spectrum. We get our share of hate mail and that kind of thing. Had some articles written about us, that sort of thing. But very small portion, I would say, goes that direction. Most people, I actually don't know. And actually, when we're at the White Privilege Conference, that's when we hear from people the most. And we heard from all kinds of folks last year about, oh, we're using your podcast as our professional development. The whole district listened to that episode, and then we had breakout groups. So a lot of times we don't even know how it's being used because we sort of put it out and people are using it virtually. We're trying to figure out how to support teachers more who are using it that way, who can't come to a training or afford to have us into their schools. So we're trying to find more ways to support that, just sort of grassroots. You know, sometimes we have one teacher in Nebraska who's like, thank you so much, I'm here by myself and everybody thinks I'm crazy, and looking at your work helps me not feel crazy, and I want to do more, know more. And it starts with that one person, right? And bringing in other teachers. So it's a pretty broad spectrum. I would say that when we offer workshops, they're pretty full. So that's good news. And as with anything, it can't be the solution, right? It's just one stop on the train. And so what else are you doing? And we're always trying to talk about, okay, so what's the plan from here? You have some information, what are you going to do with it? And how are you going to take action? And how are you going to keep doing this work for yourself? So.
Well, I always admire the hustle, the creativity and projects and new creations. Teaching while white, that's a little bold, creative springboard. How did that happen? I mean, where did the title come from? And what is it when you talk to people about what Teaching While White is trying to do? I mean, how do you describe that in a short minute or so, if you were doing so in a kind of public service announcement to let folks know?
Right. I'll start with how it started, I guess, and the name. It actually started with a conversation I was having with Shelley Touchluck about the work I was doing and how to reach a broader audience. And she was talking about starting a blog. And I thought, yeah, I want to start a blog about what I know, but I want to hear what other people are doing out there, because I know there are folks doing stuff, but we're all in our silos and in isolation, and wouldn't it be great to know? And so I had worked with Elizabeth Denevy years ago, and she had sort of mentored me in some early stages of my development. And I thought, just out of courtesy, I'm going to reach out to her and let her know that I've got this idea. and see what she has to say. And we ended up on the phone for 4 hours. And at the end of it, she said, I don't mean to insert myself into your project, but I want to insert myself into your project. And I was thrilled. I mean, it seemed like we're 100 times more likely to succeed with the two of us than just me. We have very different skills and ways of looking at the work that I think are really complementary. And I just feel like it was a divine intervention that we got to be paired in doing this work together. I feel so fortunate. And I don't know how long I could have sustained it on my own. So it's been amazing. The name, it was always the name that I wanted. And just like, and your name of your organization, there was a lot of pushback and people were upset and said, I really want to hire you, but can you use a different name because it's too off-putting to our teachers? And I was like, well, then I'm not the right person. If the name in and of itself is a problem, then it's not going to work, right? It's definitely a play on driving while Black, not to say that it's the same danger, but that there is real danger in teacher whiteness when we don't name it. And so that's what we're trying to shine a light on. When we first started, I think that's really what I wanted to look at was how are we using whiteness, white culture, white supremacy as this baseline from which we're trying to grow other things? And if that's true, what can grow from that, right? And how do we shine a light on that so people see that we have a set culture, set of expectations as white teachers? And through the work, definitely want teachers to be better teachers for all students, but I'm becoming increasingly more concerned. We interview kids for the podcast and a lot of white kids, and some as young as 9, they volunteer, they know their names are going to be changed. They'll break down into tears, they fall apart, talking about whiteness. And we have successfully raised the next generation of white people who are afraid to talk about race. And that is what keeps me up at night. We can't do anything until we shift some of this white culture. And if we have white kids and everyone thinks racism is a generational thing, it's really not. And we see 7-year-olds who are terrified. And so I need teachers to model, to be equipped, not just to recognize the ways that they hold impossible standards across, but also to model that there is a different way forward as a white person, that you can be a white anti-racist, and that we don't only ever name whiteness in connection to oppression, in the same way that we don't want kids of color only to see themselves reflected in their curriculum or by their teachers as oppressed, right? That there's two sides of that. And the damage, again, is not the same, but we're never going to get anywhere if we have white kids who are equally unprepared and ill-equipped to talk about race. So that's sort of, it's been shifting in lots of directions. It gets bigger and bigger instead of smaller and smaller, but that's where we're at right now.
So can you talk about the Multicultural Teaching Institute? Like, how is that different? Are those things connected? Can you just share with folks, because some folks may see your name associated with that and your email. So you just talk a little bit about how those two things are different or related?
Sure. Yeah, the Multicultural Teaching Institute started first. That started about 8 years ago. And again, I just was talking to other teachers. I'm like you. I like to network and what are we going to do? And let's not just talk about it. What are we doing? Let's network. Let's create something. And so with 10 or so teachers from lots of different identities, we started talking and designing, and I decided that we needed a conference that was for teachers and by teachers, because I kept going to all these education conferences and like systemic change has to happen, but what do I do as a teacher tomorrow that's going to make a difference in my classroom? And that's where my frustration was. I can't change policy, but I'm with the kids from 9 to 3 every day, so how am I going to use that power and leverage that time? And so started this conversation with about 10 other educators, and we created the Multicultural Teaching Institute, a 3-day conference. It ultimately became, we do 1-day workshops throughout the year as well. And originally that conference was looking at lots of different forms of identity. We were looking at gender, sexual orientation, and race primarily. And then over the years, we really realized you can't talk about all those things in 3 days. So we started to focus just on race. And it was through that work that I became more and more fixated on whiteness and why we were never talking about it. And in all these education conferences, we talk about race and education. We're talking about Black and brown students, families, teachers. We're not talking about whiteness. And so it was from that work that Teaching While White came to be, pretty much. And the conversations I got to have and the people I got to meet.
Yeah, yeah. Now, as you mentioned, being someone that works with a title called the White Privilege Conference, the Privilege Institute, there's some common kind of pushback that all of us get doing this work, but there's some unique stuff that you get when you name white and whiteness. And so I wanted to hear you not necessarily talk about what that looks like and how often you get that, but most importantly, like how do you take care of yourself when you're doing this kind of work, pushing around those issues, because the resistance we get with those kinds of titles named can be unique often.
Yeah. It's taken a long time to figure that out, but most recently, sort of created a coalition of other white women in this work who we support each other and check in on a regular basis. There are people, I was in a really bad situation recently in Minnesota, and that's actually how that started. I started a group text chat with about 9 women who do this work, and I was like crying in a bar in Minnesota, and just feeling totally overwhelmed and scared. And that has been miraculous and amazing and has given life and made me less afraid, I guess, because it does feel a lot of times like we're out there on our own. And then I have folks of color in my life who are equally holding me accountable and supporting the work I do. And when I wobble and feel like I don't want to do it anymore, they let me know that's not an option and remind me that it's not an option and hold me accountable and support me. So I feel very lucky to have lots of people in my life who do this work, who understand what it's like, and know that we all got to show up for each other if we're going to make a difference.
Yeah, yeah. Crying in a bar in Minnesota, that sounds like a real great country music song for the future. Like,
True.
but yeah, this work can have you crying every day, particularly again, as I mentioned, when you push around the issues that y'all are pushing around. Let me ask you about COVID-19, because as you, I'm sure, have experienced, this epidemic has essentially made us stop and stand still. And, business, consulting, all that stuff has come to a screeching halt. So I'm wondering, I mean, at least for myself, I find myself reflecting internally, personally, professionally, and what I'm asking people is, first, how are you doing? Because we're going on day 50, I think. I don't know, 40 something, I think 50 here in Wisconsin. So just wondering how you're handling quarantine and the community of folks around you that you're connected with. What's your sense of how those folks are doing in reference to this sudden, just screeching halt COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah. Well, there's lots of different parts of that. I personally, feel fortunate. I have an apartment. I'm safe. I have food to eat. And so I know I'm very fortunate. I had to make a tough personal decision to send my kids to their dad because our apartment really isn't big enough for all of us when we can't leave. So I've been without my kids personally for over a month, which has never happened in my life before. So that's been rough. But other than that, I also recognize daily how lucky I am and what's going on. It just feels like it turned up the volume 100%. It's like all the stuff that we knew was happening anyway, and now it's just the volume is on full blast. And I live across from a graveyard where I see hearses pulling in, and I live 2 blocks from a hospital. I hear the sirens. I live on the bus line. I see who are the essential workers who are getting on that bus and who's not. So it just feels like everything is loud and overwhelming, right? And I spoke to a friend of mine, a woman of color in Oakland yesterday. She's lost 12 people. And she was on 4 different Zoom memorial services this week. And all I can do is offer love and support. And it feels, it's a helpless feeling. I'm not facing that in any way. And it's just all very real right now. The discrepancy is, it's just, if we ever could deny it before, I don't know how we're going to deny it now. I mean, I'm sure racism will find a way, but.
Yeah. Well, that's, an important point that I've been reflecting on, particularly as it relates to educators, teachers, administrators, and especially, as you know, working in and having some connections to the super privileged, these schools where, some folks are spending more on school than people are on their homes. So I'm wondering, what's your sense as you reflect on, the work we've been doing for these years, what COVID, the pandemic, has really kind of, as you said, illuminated, and the way forward. I mean, what are you foreseeing, or thinking about maybe some of the challenges we're going to be facing when we get back to whatever the new normal is? I don't know if it'll be new. I just think it'll be normal.
I pray that it's not normal. My fear is that we have just taken 30 years backwards in terms of race and racism, in terms of just broadening the gaps that were already there. My hope is that we can leverage, like I keep seeing all these white educators saying, we're in crisis. And really, this is a crisis, no doubt. I don't mean to diminish that. And it's a tiny part of a much bigger crisis, right? And white people, until they discover it for themselves and name it, they don't see it. So I'm like, well, at least if people can see a crisis, and I'm hearing principals saying it's never been more important to consider the home lives of our students. And I think, no, it's always been important. And I'm glad now that you can see that it's important, and how are you going to address it in the long term, not just to get through this pandemic, but what are we doing as a school district, as a society, to support kids all the time. So I'm hoping the fact that people are seeing, some of the white folks in power are starting to see some of it, little glimpses, like the Matrix, right? They can see it for a minute and then it disappears again. But that we keep shining that light on that and saying, okay, I know, so what are we gonna do? How are we gonna make change? That's my hope. I don't know if it's gonna happen, but that's what I'm gonna be working on.
Yeah. I'm myself grappling with this concept. If Black lives didn't matter before, and this pandemic is illuminating the absolute destruction and some real disparities around Black and brown lives, where is the message that there's going to be some kind of awakening of something being different once we emerge from this? Because what I'm noticing living in the suburbs, I mean, social distancing is actually the way of the suburbs. I mean, that's the way people have lived. And I think if it wasn't for at least some of the news that's out there, people could literally be experiencing this pandemic and not know about the devastating loss associated with people of color. Like you said, some of us have those relationships and we can reach out and folks share their stories, but it's quite likely folks are essentially in Zootopia
Yep.
for the last 30, 40, 50, 60 days. And I can see why people are saying, hey, let's get back to work. Let's get back to business. Because, I think there's a real disconnection still. So anyway, I don't know. That's that. I appreciate that because I'm wondering, you've done some work and doing some work with White Affinity Group. Just talk to me. Give me a sense of how that's going, because it seems oxymoronic that white folks are gathering to do good things around social justice. So give me a sense of how that work is going. What are some of the challenges? What are some of the successes working in white affinity space?
Yeah. I need to be clear, it's white anti-racist affinity space. I shouldn't just say white affinity space because there's a lot of that all the time, with the purpose to talk about anti-racism specifically. Honestly, I probably shouldn't say this, but I will. Particularly for new teachers or folks who are new to this work, it's like remediation, right? It's like you got to play catch up. You got to have at least the vocabulary so that you can show up to a cross-racial dialogue and not completely freeze and say nothing and get tongue-tied and cry and do all the things that we do. So the initial work is just understanding that to be white is to have a race, that it matters. What does that mean? How has it impacted you? How has whiteness defined you in your life? Those are really the first steps. And honestly, in a lot of these workshops, we get questions like, am I supposed to say Black, people of color, colored people, right? Like there's such lack of education within these white isolated places where they've never had the conversation and they don't even know what words to use. So I feel like it's remediation just to get folks up to speed so they can at least have the conversation. That's the first part. For the folks who, there are always a group of folks who are deeply in it, who've been doing it for a long time, who are invested in racial justice. And we talk about what are our spheres of influence, what changes can we make, not to be white saviors, but to figure out how racism has affected us. And again, it's not in any way the same way. And whiteness and white supremacy have dehumanized all of us. And so how are we going to reclaim our humanity? And how are we going to change the system for everybody? And what tables of power do we sit at? All these teachers who sit on committees and have people they connect with. And so thinking really strategically about how to affect more systemic change, I would say, is where we get to, hopefully.
And I know sometimes people ask this question, and I don't know if we really can have an answer to it, but I'm just curious, based on all the work you've done, where you are right now in your space and place doing this work, and some of the challenges that we can foresee ahead of us. Are you optimistic? What do you feel that we could actually do? Let's just say we can be strongly participating in anti-racist work for the next 25 years. Are you feeling some change, some progress is possible? What are your thoughts about the next 25 years in reference to, are we going to be moving forward in a way that's better, or how do you respond to that?
I remember when the LA riots happened. I was just graduating from college and I was writing my thesis about homelessness, and I thought, well, this is awful, terrible occurrence, and let's just burn it down. And so there's part of me that sees these white supremacists showing up to city halls with their guns, and I feel like there's real potential for some kind of civil war, right? Like we're just getting more and more separated in this country, I feel like. And again, what was always there is just being amplified. And so part of me just says, let's just go, let's just blow it all up and start all over again. And that's a hard thing to say, because I understand the cost that will come with that. I don't know that there'll be any major change. And if I had to guess, I would say there isn't going to be major change. But I can only show up and hope that I've made 5 minutes difference for somebody somewhere, right? That's all we can do. And to do nothing is not really an option. So we take little steps forward. We try and build greater racial consciousness in this country, and try and build on what people are starting to see sometimes. But, you know, even in the reporting of this COVID, and we talk about the racial discrepancies, you still hear in the description, there's still like this embedded, like, oh, it's a genetic issue, or, you know, and so that's the racism is so slippery, right? And finds all these different ways to cover itself. And so I just hope there's something in all of this that wakes people up a little bit and see a different world than the one they think they know. That's all.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Now, Joe Fagan, one of my mentors and someone I've learned so much from, and one of his graduate students and now a renowned professor at the University of Dayton, Leslie Picard, wrote this great book, Front Stage, Backstage Racism, where they ask students to go home and really in white spaces kind of record, write down some of the things that are said when no people of color around. So I'm wondering if you found yourself in any of those spaces, and when there's no people of color around, what's your sense of the attentiveness, concern of white folks, particularly as it relates to pandemic, but some of these disparities, some of what's going on? Have you had a chance to do any of that homework or research? I mean, you have a sense of I'm often curious about what's being said, what attention is being paid in the most powerful circles and spaces where often no people of color are found.
That doesn't happen to me a lot, to be honest, because my reputation precedes me in most places I go. Even socially, people have a clue about what it is I do. So people tend to be more careful around me, truthfully. In the few circumstances where it does happen, I do see some real vulnerability and, you know, a desire to understand that they don't have the full picture. They don't know everything they need to know, and sort of a desire to do it, and a lot of fear. So I'm not seeing a lot of like powerful people saying, you know, messed up racist things straight up. That doesn't happen to me. But I see folks wanting to know, but you know, and then 5 seconds later, it's like, okay, but now let's talk about something else, right? So it's that matrix thing of like seeing it for a second, being curious, but not curious enough to risk anything personally to find out more.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Maybe we need to create a super spy team of white allies and send them into the
Exactly.
depths of whiteness just to get a sense of what's going on, because I think that's part of the power of white supremacy is it has some real privacy when making its decisions and moving forward. And there's, as we know over history, been some real concerted efforts on the part of the power structure to infiltrate social justice organizations, but I don't think we've attempted to flip the coin, so to speak.
No, you're right.
Just something for us to think about in the
Yeah.
future. Let me ask you about, speaking of the future, the next 10 years. What do you see? What do you think about when you're looking at, you know, maybe your work and Teaching While White, Multicultural Institute? You got anything planned, anything you're so excited about in reference to the next 10 years?
I wish I could say I did. I tend to wake up in the middle of the night with these big ideas and then try and figure out how to work them out. I'm not very strategic in that way in some ways, but and also right now I'm just so focused on hour to hour. I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about the future right now. And frankly, whether I'm going to be able to sustain this whole situation to stay in the work. And so grappling with that myself. But yeah, my hope is that all these projects can harness there's gonna be some people who wake up because of this, and we need more folks on the team. So just finding different ways to harness, to say, I know you saw it, and now you gotta do something, because now you know better, you gotta do better. So trying to just get more people involved, more white people. More white people. I say to Elizabeth all the time, we need an army of white people. Where are we going to get them? We need more people.
Yeah. Well, I think that we don't know the impact y'all are having. You mentioned it yourself in reference to the work that's going on and some of the folks that are listening and paying attention to the work you're doing, and you don't even know that. So I think that's one thing to remember. But I also feel like one thing I'm coming out of this believing is those of us who are on board or in the same kind of mindset have to do a better job of collaborating and strategizing. Because like you said, I mean, folks are going to be taking a real hit, and whether consulting is even an option moving forward is a real question, because we don't even know if school's going to bring us in or bring us back. We don't even know if, the institute happens. Can you have 25 people? Can you have 200 people? Yeah. So there's so many of those kinds of questions out there. So I appreciate you definitely coming here and coming on to share with us some of your thoughts and challenges and ideas. We have been asking people, what have you been reading? What have you been watching? What have you been listening to? Is there anything that you have been either enjoying to kind of take you away, or that's building your knowledge or soothing your, kind of giving you some relaxation through listening, that you'd like to share and add to our "you should do this" during the pandemic list?
Well, truthfully, I have about 12 books going. I feel like my attention span is pretty short right now. I read a chapter, if that, and then move on to something else. It's like grazing in the refrigerator. What's gonna fill the hole? So I keep picking up lots of different books. I do a lot of dancing in my apartment by myself with my dog, and loud music. My neighbors love me. And truthfully, I'm a busy person. I'm not good at sitting still. And so I'm really trying to cultivate that. I've been trying to meditate. I go to a class in the mornings if I can wake up, and just trying to remember to breathe, because moment to moment, hour to hour is what we've got right now. And so trying to stay present, not just distract myself, but to really tune in and see what's going on.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. We had someone last night, and he was talking about just, calling somebody, just trying to use this opportunity to do some outreach that he hadn't done in a while. And it really, I think, helped me to think about also not to just watch something or just occupy my time, so to speak, but actually let folks know you're thinking about them. Because you just, like you said, minute to minute, day to day, you just never know what folks are dealing with. So thank you for that reminder. Listen, Jenna, we appreciate you. I'm just letting you know, the White Privilege Conference, you're always welcome. Any way we can collaborate, partner, we'd love to do that. And it's great to have you here just talking about the great work you're doing. Can you just remind people of how they find out, where they go to get information about the Multicultural Teaching Institute, as well as Teaching While White?
Yep. First, let me say I appreciate you and the work you do. I think you're a visionary in this work and a networker. And without this conference, so many things wouldn't be possible. So I just need to thank you first. As far as finding me, we're at www.multiculturalteaching.org. And the other one is teachingwhilewhite.org. And we have a presence in both spaces. It's easy to find us, to connect, to reach out. Please do. If there are white teachers doing stuff, grappling with issues, screwing up, I mean, we want to hear about that too. Please write for us, check us out, talk to us. We want to know what's going on out there. It's not great to be in isolation, and we do feel stronger when we're in community around this work. So I hope folks will do that.
Great, great. Well, thank you, Jenna Chandler-Ward. We appreciate you. Take care of yourself. Be safe. And I'm sending you a Wakanda hug until I see you in real life. All right. Peace.
Peace. Bye. Thank you.